My name is Rahul Arya. I head up the Global Technology Solutions Architecture practice for JPMorgan globally, and we look after a large bench of 50,000 plus engineers managing 6,000 plus applications for modern platforms. Our topic today is let devs be devs. Simplistically speaking, it's all about managing and building products to abstract away compliance and control requirements from our development cycle so that our developers can ship code and increase their velocity of adding value to the business. We also have introduced resiliency into that product set to build upon chaos techniques, which I'll cover today, and hopefully leave you with an understanding of how to solve for complexity for a large enterprise that's trying to modernize their product. So with that, let's get started. A little bit about our scale here at JPMorgan Chase. Obviously, as you may know, we're a large bank globally, operating at multiple different countries. We currently run about 6 trillion in transactions daily, looking after 27 trillions in assets under custody. We've got over 50 million in digital active customers, over 40 million in debit and credit card accounts. All of these business operations require heavy investment, heavy focus on technology that operates it. We've got over 50,000 engineers and technologists worldwide that look after these lines of businesses, as well as run and manage 6,000 plus applications on a 250,000 virtual and mobile workspaces that we also have to manage internally. As well as we've got over 400 petabytes of data that run and offer these services to our clients. As you can imagine, that scale of an enterprise requires a heavy focus in our approach, our processes, to be able to modernize our plan for our next gen of opportunities from a business perspective. So what I'm going to talk about today is really thinking about a different approach for the scale and enterprise, such as JPMorgan Chase, which can be applied to any enterprise if you think about some of the common challenges and common opportunities that you will see when you're actually modernizing your technology stacks. So what are the challenges, right? Why is this difficult and different for a large enterprise? Well, as I mentioned, given our scale, we have several different lines of businesses focusing on different business strategies aligned to their technology strategies, and thereby really creating a mishmash of manual provisioning, sometimes inconsistent deployments. Every team may be focused on their own compliance and resiliency requirements, creating a lot of opportunity for us from a central chief technology office to create efficiencies to increase their velocity to ship code. So how do we do that? How do we break down that complex large enterprise environment and think about a separate, different approach to modernize and accelerate our modernization journey? Well, we have a simple goal. We should be arming our developers with deployments under an hour, cloud deployments to do their web app, build a microservice, go after an AI ML use case, and run fast operations. Standardize and make a frictionless environment for easy deployments that are not just fast, but also secure, compliant, and maybe we can even systemize our resiliency constructs. Well, with that goal in mind, we set off on a journey a few quarters ago to build centralized products and really increase our adoption rate and velocity from a development perspective, thereby bringing JPMorgan Chase from a large, complex enterprise to a simple, streamlined, efficient technology company. How do we do this today? Very simple. We think about, first what we do is we create blueprints. We think about our application estate across the 6,000 plus applications slated for modernization, and we break them down into what are the common blueprints that are required for our app engineers. Ultimately, what that nets down to is that we're looking at typically a web app, we're looking at building a microservice. Tons of our data and analytics teams are focused on AI/ML use cases. We have big data platform topics from a blueprint perspective that we solve centrally. All of that culminates into a majority of our app estate for modernization. When we look at those blueprints, we essentially look at our number one priorities to make sure that those blueprints and app architectures are highly compliant, build in all the control requirements that our bank has to adhere to, make sure our data is secured and has zero resiliency issues as well. So it's time to assemble that blueprint. How do we assemble it? Well, we use that blueprint architecture and codify it. We build scripts via Terraform and productize that blueprint with embedded controls at a resource perspective as well as a environment perspective. We leverage our standardized CI/CD toolchain and pipeline to kind of deploy those products into test, dev, and production environments. Now, how do you ensure that they're secure? That is the ultimate question. And what we do here is really make sure within our process, we're double checking, triple checking for security and ensuring those deployments are secure day one. Now, you've got your standardized blueprints. As a developer, you get that product day one. You get your control requirements built in so you can be in a test dev environment within an hour. Now, your deployments are secure because you can systematically check those for all of your control requirements and meet your cyber requirements without actually having to worry about them. And then what you do need to worry about, obviously, is as you build your application, you want to make sure that application is highly resilient and scalable for your demand and for your specific requirements for that application. Well, in comes chaos. So let's cover a little bit about chaos here at JPMorgan Chase and how we're actually thinking about delivering chaos for modern platforms. Simplistically speaking, for chaos built on a Gremlin service is really we have a approach and a concept of building chaos, standardizing chaos as a service, building chaos experiments that are quick to consume, easy to use, solve for our biggest and highest problem sets that are common across our application estate, across our application platform. Our architecture enables here, that you see here today, enables a seamless integration into the Gremlin API, allows for our app developers to use the Gremlin console, separates the control plane from our application data that makes sure that the application is completely secure and we don't have any challenges from a security perspective. This obviously is an agent-based architecture. It's pre-enabled within our blueprint construct that I just talked about that enables a low-friction environment for our application developers. With that, our biggest question and challenge in front of us was that, okay, we've enabled our app deployments, we've secured and made them highly compliant. Can we even make our resiliency services built on chaos easier to consume, easier to operate, easier to understand? What are the standardized testing services that our app engineers require globally? What are some of the challenges that we face as a bank, as an enterprise, that we need to worry about on the modern platforms that we run, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, multi-cloud? So we had a simple concept that we deployed and we built, is really understanding what our resiliency service requirements are. Right? Since we already know the design constructs, we can pre-build chaos services for our engineers. We break them down into two different silos: cloud resources and provider outages. So the platforms that we build our applications on also have to be tested for their own outages and alerted for us to be able to react to those outages. We've created standardized testing services, scaling the resources for single points of failure, for example, demand and performance management, if there is a scaling event for your application with our customers kind of scaling up for an outage or a volume event, high volume event that you have to manage for yourself, well, we manage and test for that. We also manage and test and provide standardized services for fundamental resiliency issues such as in-region availability zone failures versus a regional failover in a hyperscale public cloud platform that you have to failover your entire application out of region. Now, all of these requirements may differ from an app by app use case, but what we look after is really the lowest common denominator and creating standard services for our app engineers at scale. So then they get to decide on which application and resiliency service is required for their specific use case. Ultimately, what we're doing is really allowing our engineers to test various scenarios and build solid, highly resilient application for their environment. Now, this is great. You've gone from understanding what your standard app architecture looks like. You as a developer have a product set to build a web app, to build a highly secure and compliant microservice, to now ensure your security is guaranteed day one because you meet all of our compliance requirements and security and control checks are built into your deployment pipeline. Now you also have your chaos services within your life cycle to be able to manage, build for resiliency, build for events coming up within your application requirements, and ensure resiliency. But how do you know? How do you validate? How do you understand that your application requirements are met? Well, you build some validation rule sets for you as a developer within JPMC. So fundamentally, core resiliency validation rule sets are really around ensuring sufficient failover capacity, making sure your application's RTO and RPO requirements have been achieved, all by automating resiliency, embedding chaos into your pipeline, embedding and testing for your services to ensure resiliency requirements, and then ultimately alerting on those service degradations. These standardized rule sets and validation checklists allow our application engineers to not worry about resiliency, not worry about chaos topics. We actually make it very simple, very frictionless for them to adopt chaos both from a cultural perspective and from a systemized perspective. So with that, I want to conclude with a few key takeaways of why this is important. Again, if within the backdrop of a large enterprise really looking to make their developer bench strength more efficient, more streamlined, and increase the velocity of codes being shipped, it all requires a different approach, a different way of thinking around your modernization journey. It starts with understanding what all the lines of businesses in the globe or in your organizations are working on, understanding what your app estate looks like, breaking them down into standard blueprints, codifying those blueprints with compliance and security embedded, making sure that we are secure day one, building in checks within your deployment pipelines to ensure that there are zero risks within your deployment, that our cyber audit as well as compliance teams are highly confident in what those deployment architectures look like, as well as your code base has complete compliance and controls built in. Now, lastly comes resiliency. As you build your application on our standard products and blueprints, we want to make sure that we have chaos agents built into that application blueprint that enable and empower and make it very simple for you to test resiliency of your application. And you are able to, quite frankly, just abstract away both compliance, security controls, as well as resiliency from an app engineer's day-to-day, thereby, in a nutshell, letting devs be devs. With that, I thank you for your time and appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Cheers.
So Rahul is actually with us today. So he is available for a Q&A, and it looks like we've got a couple questions already rolling in for him to answer. So feel free, if you've got questions for him, submit those through the platform, and you can join in Slack at QA-Rahul-Arya. Hey Rahul, how's it going?
It's going well, Jason. How are you? Don't mind the gym equipment in the back. It's cool.
You've been working out.
Trying.
It's a great way to do things while folks are stuck inside. So I totally understand that.
That's right.
So we do have a bunch of questions rolling in. The first one that we've got, what about culture of chaos is the question. How do you get to thinking code first for reliability and get away from legacy manual work?
Yeah, that's awesome question, and one that I spend personally quite a few cycles on solving for our bank. From a principles perspective, our North Star has always been code first, to solve for fundamental challenges and make technology a first-class citizen in the bank. Ultimately, as I've described in the talk, we're also breaking down architecture and turning that into code. To give you an example of actually the tactical execution of it, just today, I was speaking with our leadership here at the bank and my peers around how to truly productize our architecture estate. We've solved for blueprints, we've solved for resiliency. Now, can we even take it up a stack and get app architecture as a product as we evolve the bank to be a technology behemoth? But from a culture perspective, right? The culture perspective, it's an important dialogue, and I want to pick on a comment that Gene made right before I got here around we're just sort of in the first inning of this, right? Where we're talking about DevOps and SRE and chaos, but there's a long way to go. We've got to change the hearts and minds of how we operate from a day-to-day perspective, how we think, which is why I always talk about approach and strategy in evolving an enterprise into that sort of way of thinking, that sort of way of approach. Ultimately, what we do, a few actual strategies for the audience here, is that we introduce some bias. We introduce bias for code first. We introduce bias for evolving our technology engineers day to day and focusing on code by looking at their commit rates, by shipping products that are code first, by quite frankly evolving the technical experience and strength into explaining. Like I said, I do these talks quite often internally around how to work with our products and chaos. But I think slowly but surely we're able to sort of chip away at that culture and that mindset and really get that on-ramp into the mindset of code first. So, yeah.
Nice. You had mentioned in there, the idea of measuring things like how fast they're shipping, which I think is a great top level metric of success, right? Because as Gene mentioned, fast beats slow. So measuring deployment and how quickly you're shipping is a great thing. There was one question that came in that asked, what kind of language do developers use to define resiliency requirements? And so the follow-up to this is, do they define a target metric, since we're talking about measurement, or do they just simply define the kind of job that they're running? This is a batch job, or this is a user-facing HTTP service. How is that resiliency actually measured and defined by developers?
Yeah, so I think at the top level, when we looked at just breaking down legacy resiliency and going to chaos, frankly, a couple of years ago, and last few quarters have been very violently focused on expanding that run rate. We've looked at several different strategies around how do we expand our approach, right? Centrally giving that service and offer that up. What we've seen is almost a 10x adoption rate in the last few quarters alone, from where we started to where we are today, and that's growing into 2021. I think it's still sort of early days where lots of our teams, given our scale, are defining what does it truly mean for their business and their technology teams, from like a metrics adoption rate perspective. And they're really what I loved about it the most is the excitement and the experimentation and learning about how to break down legacy applications, building microservices based architectures, using resiliency in the middle of it, and kind of learning and that cultural transformation is sort of step one. If I were to phase this out, right? What I expect is, I think, as we go into phase two, where we're heavily using this in production, then you'll see more of like, yep, this is my metrics, here's my failure rate, here's what the impact of me using resiliency via chaos is actually having on the bank as well as my day-to-day. So I expect that to be a bit more defined, but it isn't at the current stage yet.
Yeah. You had mentioned production there, which actually is a good segue to another question that came in that was asking, would it be possible for you to provide some more details about your cloud architecture and which environments are you running the tests in?
I can speak to it at a high level. So we've got at a broad level a multi-cloud strategy, both from a on-premise perspective as well as off-prem on the public hyperscale cloud platforms. And we both, at a high level, we have chaos running in both, including a legacy VSI stack. So we are at an inflection point today in the bank where we've got 3 separate projects going on in both all of our modern platforms. And we run chaos almost as a product internally to look at which strategy is working, which isn't working. The one that I described to the audience today is directly pointed at hyperscale public cloud platforms. You can pretty much guess which one that is. But without naming names, I think that's the one that we frankly violently focus on, making sure the bank is maturing our offering and expanding our adoption rate.
Yep. Everybody else out there can guess. Since I work with your teams directly, I actually know. But yeah, that leads to another great question that came up though, that's, as you're working with both private, your own cloud and the public clouds, how would you characterize like the differences as you rolled out chaos engineering, or are there any?
Yeah, so definitely, I think what we're finding is some of our internal bench and our skill set, the developers are frankly very excited about the hyperscale cloud platforms. And it's second nature for them to sort of operate in that way, right? Your DevOps, your SRE constructs, and your kind of CI/CD pipelines, and working in that fashion. We always find out, myself, from a personal perspective, in the past decade or so, have seen sort of those two mindsets come together, kind of a legacy build perspective versus using the public cloud to really kind of go fast forward into modernization. The long story short there is that what I'm seeing is folks who have the DevOps mindset, who are advanced in the hyperscale cloud platforms, are very much akin to building for resiliency, building for chaos as code, and it's almost second nature to them. Like, yeah, why wouldn't we do this? Versus some folks that maybe are working on our legacy platforms are now catching up, but it's happening pretty rapidly.
Yeah. So another question that's slightly related, because as you mentioned, the hyperscale clouds are hyperscale. It's that easy ability to grow massively large. But along with that, this question came in, that's how do you coordinate large scale experiments there, especially when they span potentially multiple teams? For example, running experiments on your compliance platform that affects everybody. How do you manage and coordinate that?
Awesome question. What I would sort of lay out to the audience is that, start from the ground up. Go for the low hanging fruit first. Make it almost part of your day to day, and just doing creating hypotheses, doing test experiments, running chaos in your test dev environments. Get that bench sort of used to how to test and define and introduce and deliver for resiliency. That's sort of step one. And then as we are going as a firm, we're going towards very complex use cases in terms of our modernization journey. That is almost, chaos is almost going to follow suit. And that becomes sort of part of your working day. I'll give you a few examples sort of at a high level, even just today within our lines of businesses, whether it's investment banking or asset wealth management. There are teams now building complex applications on modern platforms. And day one, their question is, how do I get started with chaos in my test environment or dev environment, and be able to just use that day one just to understand my base application architecture and then sort of grow that as they build towards production. So I think it just becomes second nature in time. Yeah.
Cool. We did have another question. You'd mentioned building and developing those blueprints. So this question came in that said, when talking about technology stacks to develop blueprints, what are some of the overall technology stacks that are you usually using? And organizationally, what teams tend to be involved in developing those blueprints?
Yeah, I love the question. So this has been sort of our big win in the last few quarters. So just going to give you some context around why does it even matter? It's really around solving for the lowest common denominator in terms of looking at a large enterprise with big estates, right? So that's how I always think about it. And what my teams then work on is we work with hundreds of dev teams and take their priorities centrally to say, okay, well, this is a problem I want to solve for. Here's the compliance issue that's making my code velocity slow. Please help me do this. And that indication then becomes Arbica works centrally. So we've set up a CTO organization that actively works at solving for our lowest common denominator problems. And we call that, a blueprint for a three-tier web app, for example. And then what we do essentially is work with our cyber and our compliance teams to say, okay, which are the topics that we can solve for centrally in a focused fashion so that our dev teams don't have to worry about it. And I'll argue that most enterprises could use that approach in terms of solving and increasing their rate of adoption for modern services. There are two things that, in my mind, anytime you try and solve for a legacy stack into modernization, there are two things that jump out. It's really security and architecture. Because you have to think about both of those two things. Before you get to code, you've got to think about both of those two things in a new way. Shape or form. And if you do that really, really well, and you do that from a scale perspective with low-hanging fruit, quick wins, fail fast kind of approach, you can go pretty fast.
Nice. So as you came together and developed sort of that baseline, I'm curious then with those blueprints, is it almost a modular system where you've got a baseline and then you start, for specific stacks, you layer on top of that?
Yeah, spot on. I think so. Think about it as in terms of if you had all of the enterprise IT into sort of layers and blueprints that are codified, and you could use things like CloudFormation templates, for example, or Terraform, and build that into your pipelines and have them pre-vetted with your teams that are stood up on the platform, and then continue to iterate on what's working and what's not working with your devs. Because I think that's key, right? Don't be afraid to go fast, but also have that feedback loop into your build process. You've got to always talk to your customers. For me, my customers are all my developers internally here. at JPMC, and we listen. We always worry about what's working, what's not working, and then continue to evolve that product set to the tune where we also look at adoption rate, right? What's getting adopted, what's not getting adopted, what's working for our regulators to make sure that they have high confidence in what we are actually shipping to production. So that those are the topics that we are violently focused on delivering for our firm.
Great. Well, we are out of time now. But that said, for everybody watching, please join the Slack channel QA-Rahul Arya. Rahul will be there answering your questions and continuing the conversations. Rahul, thank you so much for being a part of the conference. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Jason, thank you for having me. A quick shout out to my team, though. I forgot to thank them. I'm merely just a spokesperson. I really want to make sure the team behind all of this have done a fantastic job. They've had a great year. So I'm really appreciated. I appreciate the team. So if you're out there, I'll see you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.